Welcome, everyone, to season 13 of Talking Time
Woohoo!
with Caffeine. My guest today is the person who's going, has been uh, reviewing the Constitution with me, and hopefully, the first of those will be uploaded tomorrow or sometime this week.
Yay!
So you can see the stuff we've been working on since the election.
Ugh. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good to be back.
Yeah, we just got done with on that review. We just got done with the Bill of Rights.
Yes. So it has been quite a lot of. So this is how it's supposed to work. I was having lunch with my daughter today and was explaining about what the Constitution even is, and I was like, if you really want to know more, she's like, I don't want to know that bad, Mom. Nope, that's fair. It's a lot of hours.
Yeah, someone after we done uploading it, someone said edit it and make it a version for kids. For kids.
I could record Constitution for kids, but it would be much shorter.
That's kind of what I wanted to do originally. What I hope I do sometime is after we're done talking about stuff, get little animations up and like illustrate it.
Yeah, I can't draw, so I can't help with that. There are ways that I could illustrate it, but it would be like a lot of public domain maps and things and old political cartoons and what have you. Pictures of various founding fathers. But I always want to establish in these talks that I am not a lawyer. I am an amateur historian. See, I'm not dapper. I'm not going to say I'm not a historian. I will say I am an amateur historian. I do know what I'm talking about more than the average person, but not as much as somebody who does this for a living. But also, I've done a lot of refreshing my memory on things as we've gone through this series. So I would say I know more about this than I did a year ago.
Yeah. So going over this, remind you of stuff.
Yeah. I've taken a lot of history classes. Obviously the ones in grade school, but also in college. And I've read a lot of books about history for pleasure, because I am the kind of person who reads books about history for pleasure. And I am very, very fortunate to have had over the years some really excellent history teachers myself. I would like to particularly give a shout out to Frances Nicholson, who was my California history teacher back in the 1992-93 school year, who I'm still Facebook friends with and actually was talking with this morning, because we both went to high school in the city of Pasadena, California, which was a very busy city this morning, as they always are on New Year's Day, unless New Year's Day falls on a Sunday.
Sorry, was that your senior year?
That was my sophomore year, actually. That was in the California schools at the time. Your sophomore year, you had an option of several different one-semester history or social studies classes. And I took California history, which was a one-semester class. and learned so much that I wish it had been for the full year. Not least because Mrs. Nicholson is a spectacular teacher. I also had Jane Downhauer, who sadly died not long after she was my teacher, for both world and U.S. history in high school, and then let me take the AP history, U.S. history exam, despite not actually being in her AP U.S. history class my senior year. Without taking her class, I still managed to get a passing grade. So there's that. And then in college, I had the, sadly, also no longer with us, Dave Hitchens at my alma mater. And he was a great teacher. I had a lot of fun with him. And a lot of the more obscure stuff I learned in class about the history of the Constitution, I learned from him.
Neat. Real fast, gotta do a little plugging here.
Mm-hmm.
If you enjoy this, if you enjoy our content, why don't you support us on Patreon? Or both me and Jillian here, we both have Patreons.
Mm-hmm.
My earbuds fell out.
Oh, that's the problem with earbuds.
Yeah, which aren't sponsored by this. Which not sponsored our stream, which I got from my birthday. Anyways, yeah, merch store, Amazon wish list, all that stuff. Come wear some stylish TDWC merch, and as always, just a like, subscribe, and sharing this video will help immensely. Also have a Twitch too if you like gaming content.
Yes.
Follow and subscribe there too. And Jillian stuff want to plug anything of her stuff.
Well, Media Magpies officially went live as of the 1st of this month. We are a real live website now. So if you like me here, you can go read what I have to say about all sorts of pop culture related stuff over there. Today I published an article about the public domain day. In public domain, as of today, there are such fascinating things as the first 5 silly symphonies, including the Skeleton Dance, Ravel's Bolero, and of course the character of Popeye.
Like the sailor?
Yeah, his first appearance was in a comic strip called Thimble Theater, later just called Popeye because he kind of took over, in 1929. So as of today, Popeye, as he appears in the comic strips, is public domain.
I don't think I've actually watched a Popeye cartoon in forever.
They're rough. There's a reason people don't still watch them. One of my readers over there commented that, it would be interesting to see what somebody could do with Popeye that would make him more interesting than a lot of the stuff has, and I absolutely agree with that. Robert Altman tried, God love him, and I do like some of the songs, and Robin Williams is giving it his best in that movie, but I don't think the Robert Altman movie is so much about Popeye as it is about the fact that cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Oh, 2 things about that, Popeye real fast. I do enjoy the chicken place Popeyes.
Oh yes, they're very tasty.
And since we're both old, you remember I think it was the 90s when Popeye started eating oatmeal?
I don't, but yeah. Well, the thing is the study that claimed that there was that much iron in spinach had a decimal error in it, and it's not actually as good for you as people think. Also, your body doesn't absorb the iron from spinach as well as it does the iron in beef. So
yeah. In the 90s, I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, maybe mid 90s too. There was these commercials with Popeye eating Quaker oatmeal, instead of spinach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm
Sure.
at all.
Why not?
It was hilarious.
Yeah. On a more history-related note for my columns, Friday I have a piece that I really should have been working on already about Walt Disney testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee, which he did, and I will have things to say about it, and you get to read them Friday. Unless you are a member of the Magpie's Patreon at the $5 level or above, at which case it will go live, as soon as I have it written. Because we do early access at $5 and above over there.
All right. So like I said, we've been over the Constitution, and we decided. Well, I decided, and she agreed to talk about part of the Constitution. Is we've learned they try to balance stuff a little bit instead of having everybody one supreme master of the United States.
Yes. Yeah, one of the most important phrases about the Constitution is balance of power. Here's where we get our standard caveat that when I say the Founding Fathers, it's with the understanding that they did not agree about things. The sentence I always use is, if Alexander Hamilton had said the sky was blue, 3 guys would have checked the window. That's an extreme example, but you can find any issue in the entire early history of the country, and you will find Founding Fathers on opposite sides of it. You cannot make a universal statement about what the Founding Fathers believed. However, the majority of them did have a horror of the concept of allowing tyranny. That's kind of why the whole revolution had come about in the first place, was not wanting tyranny. So, when you read, especially the Constitution, what you see is a lot of struggle between who is going to hold how much power. And the 2 main sources of that conflict are the different branches of government and state versus federal.
We'll talk about that one first, because this was a between Constitution. Constitution was mainly going from the Articles of Confederation. See that? What's that podcast where the states had all the power to a little bit. You know what? This 13th century isn't working.
Yeah. With the Articles of Confederation, it was 13 countries in a trench coat. They were pretending to be one country, but the federal government had so little power that in practical terms it just might as well have not been there. You'll get a lot of people saying, oh, well, George Washington wasn't really the first president, it was blah, blah. No. The person they're talking about, the people they're talking about, because there were, I forget how many people, but a bunch of people held the role, was president of Congress. And he had no power over anyone. He barely had power over Congress. There was no executive branch under the Articles of Confederation. So, the Congress could pass laws, but they weren't authorized to enforce any of them, and that all had to be done at the state and local level.
Yeah.
And
I think I might be misremembering, but I think the first of the presidents of Congress later became the first Supreme Court justice, Chief Justice?
Gosh, I'd have to look it up. Um,
John
but
Jay, I think.
yeah, looking it up real quick.
At least one of the he was one of the presidents of Congress, at least, I think.
It's something that comes up a lot as one of those, like, oh, you don't know as much as you really think you do, blah, 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 blah. So the first president of the Congress was Peyton Randolph.
Oh, okay.
Who, he was a Virginia politician because, I mean, Virginia politicians ran a ton of things. The first one to hold the office post Declaration of Independence was John Hancock. And then John Jay did hold the office for not quite a year.
Okay.
From December 1778 to September 1779.
Okay, I do use that somewhere in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of them were people that no one has ever heard of. Maybe
heard of him.
Huh?
So I remember I only heard of him because he was the later Supreme Court Justice, I think, or Chief Justice.
Yeah. Probably you've heard of John Hancock. At the very least, you've probably heard the phrase to put your John Hancock on something.
The rumored big signature.
Yeah, yeah. And it is a big signature, but that's because he was the first guy to sign it, and there was a lot of room.
So it wasn't. That's a real. That's not a myth. That's a real thing.
Yeah, it wasn't so Fat George can read it without his glasses on, as they say in 1776. No, it was because he was the first guy to sign it and had the most space. And some people have heard of John Jay because, you know, he went on to be on the Supreme Court. And at the time, he was the Chief Justice of the New York Supreme Court. And some people have heard of Richard Henry Lee. Though,
was he the father of Robert Lee?
He was not. He was the uncle, I believe.
Okay.
Of Robert E. Lee.
I knew his dad fought in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, no. The Lees were a really big family in Virginia politics.
Well, they married into the Washington family.
They did marry, yeah. The Robert's wife was a Custis, and was descended from Martha. George had no known children. Let's be really clear here. Had no known children, but Martha had been married before she married George, and she had children. No, Robert's father was Henry Lee III, known as Light Horse Harry, who served under Washington and received a gold medal for service, which he's the only person under the rank of general to have gotten it. So the Lees were a hugely prestigious family, but
until they betrayed the country.
Yeah, well,
because back then states were more important to people than the country.
Yes, Robert E. Lee would have considered himself a Virginian first and an American second. So the position of President of Congress, basically you were the guy with the gavel, and that's it. That was your job.
Yeah. President of a president of no power over a Congress that had no power.
Right. It was a figurehead. Very little more than that. So when they went to go draw up the Constitution, most of them agreed that an executive was necessary in order to keep running the country, but there was a huge debate over how much power to grant that executive, and one guy or three, and how long the terms would be, and a whole lot of debate. And the purpose of it was deciding how much power goes to the federal government and how much stays on the state level, and presumably some would then trickle down to the local level. And there were still people at the Constitutional Convention who were basically of the opinion that, yes, we needed an executive branch, but we didn't really need a chief executive.
Yeah, we went last amendment we went over a few days ago was the 10th Amendment. We talked about this, what power the states do have.
Yeah. And the fact that the 10th Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, and therefore after the initial Constitution passes, tells you that this is not a debate that ended once there was a document. And, then we get into the 14th Amendment, which changes things even further. So, where the balance falls between state and federal has been changing as long as there's been a country, and arguably before, because, of course, there was how much power do the colonies have versus the crown. And the Civil War really marks the point at which the pendulum starts heavily shifting toward the federal. Because while it is not true that the Civil War was fought over states' rights, unless you want to hear me ask you the question, states' rights to do what, which I will, it is true that it made a nice rallying cry, and that the nation came together as one as a result of the war. Once it was established that, no, you don't have the authority to just break apart.
Yeah, I think that's what people say. There's a saying that it went from are to is.
Yeah. The big change after the Civil War was grammatical. The United States became a singular noun instead of a plural noun. So that obviously brings with it an added strength to the federal level, because if it's one country, then we need rules to govern the whole country. So you don't just have, you cross the border from, Indiana into Illinois or what have you.
You don't need a passport.
Huh?
No passport needed.
No passport needed. Well, and that, as we established, that's part of the Constitution. But the laws would have been so much more different back in 1840 when you cross from one state into another than they are now. The standardization of laws is much stronger. Now, there's still a certain percentage of 50 countries in a trench coat going on. We've talked in the stuff we've been pre-recording about election laws. Because election laws in this country are ridiculously varied. Mm-hmm. It's one of the weird things where they have to be unified to a certain extent because we have this one federal system that we're all voting for, but how we vote for these offices changes so radically from place to place. As I've said, my state is fully vote by mail. I don't technically even have a polling place. In theory, what I could do is go to...
Hey, can I have a Shasta?
Fine. go to the Department of Elections if I lose the ballot they've mailed me, Zane. But in practice, I just fill out the ballot and I drop it off at one of the ballot boxes around my county, or else in any mailbox. It's postage paid, and it'll get from my mailbox to the Board of Elections. And that system is handy and convenient and not in place in most of the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think Ohio has that. Not really, probably not as good as yours, but which I don't do is because I am terrible at remember the mailing stuff.
I mean, that's fair. The main reason I've gotten as good at it as I have is I make a ritual of it with the kids. I take my kids. I have pictures of every election, just about, of their entire lives, where I go with the kids to drop off the ballots, and now they put the ballots in the box and are part of the process. And that's how I remember, because I've got to get the kids to drop off the ballots, so I've got to time it for when they are home.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit. Sorry, go on. I was going to send you my train of thought, but you're still talking.
No, go ahead.
We talked about this a little bit, and we're going to talk about more in the future in the future amendments. But I've recently, a lot of conservatives are trying to bring back more state power.
Yes. With caveats. Because
when the states agree with them.
Yeah. What it tends to be in practice was that they want the states' rights to pass the laws that they want passed, but if the states disagree with them, then it needs to be a federal law.
Yeah,
the most prominent example of this is abortion.
Yeah, I was about to say that, because last year, in the 2023 election, Ohio passed a statewide women can do what they want amendment,
Yeah.
Pro-choice, for not only abortion, but for marijuana too. But that's a totally different subject there. But the senator who just won election in my state, not the one that's now vice president, but a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have one senator lost his job and replaced by an idiot. Other one became vice president. But anyways, random times that he wants to pass a federal abortion ban.
Yeah. Despite the fact that the majority of people in the country are opposed to abortion bans. And of course, the closest the Republican candidate running for governor in the November election in my state, the closest he could get to being anti-abortion was to say that he would follow state law on the subject. Because he didn't win anyway, but you cannot win a statewide election in Washington state and be anti-abortion.
Yeah,
you're going to lose.
I said this before. I was thinking, just because you're pro-choice doesn't mean you're pro-abortion. You're not like it means it's none of your business. It means it's none of your business, and it's this.
Yeah, and the thing is what we've seen since these abortion laws started getting passed is decreased numbers of doctors working in women's health care and increased rates of maternal and infant mortality. So it is a health issue. Don't let them lie to you and tell you it isn't. But the people who are saying states' rights, states' rights, states' rights are also trying to push this federal level ban because it turns out the states don't, by and large, agree with them. So I don't fully agree that they're trying to push the pendulum back towards states' rights. I think it's that they've seen that the writing is on the wall for a lot of their beliefs, and they are not going to get federal level legislation, so they're holding their issues where they can. It is wildly unpopular to, for example, ban gay marriage, as it should be, because if two consenting adults want to get married, let two consenting adults get married. I will not be taking questions on the issue at this time, but there are people who believe that it offends their God, and because it offends their God, obviously nobody else gets to do it.
Of course, the two words there are consenting and adults.
Consenting and adults, because a lot of those same people are A-okay with child marriage, which, generally speaking, one of the parties in child marriage is neither consenting nor an adult. But hey, what's a little hypocrisy among friends? So I don't think the pendulum is going to go back to states' rights, simply because I think we as a country are all too familiar with the fact that states' rights is mostly just a cover for let us oppress people. Whether it's let us oppress people of color, or LGBT people, or women as a gender.
But yeah, that's a new thing. First it was the racial thing, then it was the same-sex thing, and now it's the trans thing. It's our new.
Yeah, and they're fighting on a smaller and smaller battleground. But we talked the other day, you and I, about Griswold v. Connecticut, which was a states' rights issue. It was the states' rights to ban birth control for married women. And it's one of the rights that Clarence Thomas has said he wants to get rid of. And the outcry that will happen if he gets his way on that will destroy the careers of vast numbers of people, because don't believe what you've been told. No matter what religion you are in, a majority of people in your religion who are sexually active are using birth control. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care if you don't think it's true. Polling consistently shows 80% or higher of people, regardless of religion, use or have used birth control.
Is that the bribery judge?
Yes. Yes, it is. Allegedly.
The gift-taking judge.
Yes, he's gotten gifts from his very close friends that include things like paying his mother's mortgage. Yeah, that's the one.
I had friends like that.
Yeah, me too. John Oliver, I'll take you up on your $1 million a year. I know Clarence Thomas didn't, but I'm not proud. So I don't think the pendulum's going to shift all the way back, simply because I think too much of the country is too afraid. But on the other hand, I think a lot of people are currently afraid about what the federal government is going to do. And I, for one, am very, very grateful about the fact that my state is defending certain rights that the federal government has decided I don't get to have. And that's not just my right to control my own body, which, for the record, I can't have children anymore. I had my tubes tied right after the first Trump inauguration when my daughter was born. And I will tell you, friends, I was terrified that a law was going to get passed in the 3 weeks between the inauguration and my daughter's birth that would prevent me, a consenting 40-year-old woman, from a tubal ligation.
That's another thing. A lot of times, these late-term abortions aren't because they want. Most of the time, they aren't the times people want to want the baby there. They have the time they get to 8 or 9 months. They're not randomly. You know what? I changed my mind. I don't baby anymore. It's because of medical reasons.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something. Pregnancy isn't fun. I've done it 3 times now. And it was miserable all 3 times. Even when I was young and fairly healthy, pregnancy was still miserable, and I hated it. And it wasn't more fun at the beginning when I was throwing up all the time than it was at the end when I was no longer throwing up and just hurt a lot and had a lot of heartburn. It's horrible and awful and painful the whole way through, and it's life-threatening, and there are all kinds of consequences that aren't life-threatening. I knew a woman who has hearing loss because the bones in her ears decalcified during her pregnancy. That's a thing that can happen. They don't tell you about that. So, you're not going to be pregnant for 8 months or 9 months and then go have an abortion for funsies. That doesn't happen. If you are getting an abortion at 8 months or 9 months, it is a desperately wanted child, or at the very least, a child that you have agreed you are going to carry, and it turns out that continuing the pregnancy will probably be lethal for one or both of you. And so what you are doing by saying that you can't have that abortion is killing possibly both, which is not pro-life. I'm done playing the pro-life game. The anti-abortion stance is not pro-life. It's not. It doesn't improve life for anyone. That unborn baby that you're worrying about is going to grow up in a miserable situation because there's a reason that person chose not to have it.
Yeah, and also, killing all this stuff is also killing the funding for women that do want to have their babies. Killing their funding too.
Yeah. The thing is if you don't trust me to make that decision about my own body, maybe I shouldn't have a child. Maybe I shouldn't be responsible for another life if you can't trust me to be responsible with my own. There's a whole... I am a mother of 3 and a birth mother. I gave my firstborn up for adoption the day after he was born, and I am still passionately pro-choice for very good reasons.
I was also I was a 15-year-old baby. No, my birth mom was 15 years old and put me up for adoption. So
yeah. I gave birth about a month before my 21st birthday, knowing that I was not in a place to care for a child. And I gave them up for adoption, and there's a whole bunch of issues involved there. He's known me his whole life. We're on very good terms, but it didn't change my stance about abortion, except to say it should be more accessible.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, you decided not to at that particular time.
It was logistical as much as choice, but I then went on to choose to have 2 more children. So, and he and I have talked about it. He knows exactly what the situation was with abortion in 1997 rural Washington state. So it's not like I'm revealing secrets that I would want to keep from my child when I talk about it. But the fact is, when the Supreme Court decided that women couldn't be trusted to control their own bodies,
let the states decide.
Yeah. And one of the first things my state did was put up a very large billboard on the border with Oregon, which, for the record, also has legal abortion, saying that Washington protected the right to legal abortion.
So does that mean Washington already had the abortion rights before the Roe versus Wade in the 70s? Or
I believe we did, actually. There were some states that did and some states that didn't. It was, a patchwork system because 50 countries in a trench coat. And I'm reasonably sure that we had pre-Roe v. Wade legal abortion. Yeah, legal on request. We were one of 5 states in the United States where abortion was legal on request. You didn't have to come up with a reason.
Yeah. Obviously, we didn't have it since we passed it last year. Or actually,
yes.
No, technically now 2 years ago. Technically now.
Yeah. Pre-Roe, Ohio was legal in case of risk to woman's life. The problem with that being who gets to decide a woman's life is at risk.
Yeah, because right after that happened, it's famous. I know it's famous. It's famous to me still. Is the 10-year-old girl?
Yeah,
who got raped by her uncle or father or something. And you know what? You're gonna have an abortion, even though because it's past the 8 weeks thing. So you're screwed, little 10-year-old girl.
Yeah,
go to another state.
No, and the thing is when you say it's got to be in case of risk to the woman's life, women die. Because doctors are afraid of making the choice because they're afraid of what will happen to them if they make the choice, even if it is the correct medical choice.
Well,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, but apparently at that time, a 10-year-old could medically carry a baby, apparently, or something like that.
Yeah. Despite the fact that a 10-year-old will have a very high chance of dying in childbirth because her body is not physically ready. Just because you're menstruating doesn't mean your body is equipped to go through childbirth.
Yeah, I kind of not really a joke, kind of, but kind of. I said, if both the mother and the kid need car seats, something's not right here.
Yeah.
Because a lot of I forget what it is now. It's different from when we were growing up, but car seats are some have car seats much longer now.
Yeah. My kids are out of boosters because my kids are giants. But it's 4'9" in Washington State. You have to be in a booster until you're 4'9". And if practical, you have to be in the back seat until you're, I think, 13.
Yeah, I think that's so. I think it's 13 here too. At least that's what I said on Sesame Street commercial one time.
Yeah. Whereas when I was a kid in California, car seats for infants were kind of a suggestion. I don't think they were even legally mandated yet.
Yeah, I think I was in the booster seat till I was like 5, kindergarten age, and I got out of the cars.
Sorry.
But yeah, they're a lot more strict now. At least they should be stricter. Because I've seen I worked at McDonald's drive-through, and I've seen both passengers and drivers holding an infant in their arms in drive-through.
Which is, hugely illegal.
But yeah, but like so most of the other thing that passed. Some people we'll talk about this when we get to I think the 17th. Talk about the Senate. The state government used to elect our senators.
Yeah, the state government, not the people, the state legislature, and that's we haven't gotten to the amendment that changed that yet in our go through, but that was a power that was held by the state and not the people, which is another one of the big issues is what's held by the government, what's held by the people.
Because I guess back then, like we talk about, we'll talk about this when we get to another topic too. But like the states, I guess, were the royalty of the government. They're the upper class.
Yeah, the U.S. government is built on a strong system of elitism, and that's another. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The founding fathers were, for the most part, and in Alexander Hamilton's case, in the case of a few others, Benjamin Franklin as well, it was a case of working their way up, but I'm not sure there was a man among them who wasn't, if not rich, poor because he had squandered a fortune. Looking at you, Thomas Jefferson. So they it's not true that Alexander Hamilton said the people are a great beast, but it is true that it's a decent way of summing up what he thought of the people as a concept. He actually believed that we should abolish state boundaries. He didn't think we needed them, which would have made all power federal. There's a reason that one didn't happen. It's because nobody else was going to go along with it.
Yeah, so I think was it starting the 16th Amendment that we started getting more federal power and less state power? Because I'm gonna forget.
Starts with the 14th.
Okay.
Which is where it specifies that the laws of the Constitution apply to the states as well. The Equal Protection Clause.
We talked about one of the cases we talked about in our Bill of Rights thing was, for a long time, the Supreme Court said the Bill of Rights didn't apply to states.
Yeah. It was just a fact of law that the Bill of Rights only applied to the federal government, and you could have a state religion in your state, and the state could pass really draconian anti-pornography laws, and the state could, in theory, hold you without probable cause. There were enormous numbers of laws that are considered such a basic part of your rights as an American that up until, 175 years ago, not even, a little over 150 years ago, didn't apply to your state.
Like we mentioned, the slavery thing.
The slavery thing, But, there was that whole slave state versus free state thing. But who was allowed to vote in local and state elections could vary from state to state. You look at the last quarter of the 19th century and the first 10 or 15 years of the 20th century, women start being able to vote in state and local elections, but they are still not allowed to vote for president or representative because that's a federal office.
Well, at least federal representatives, probably maybe state representatives.
You can vote for state legislature, you can vote for, judge, you can vote for justice of the peace, you can vote for dog catcher or whatever, but you can't vote in federal offices because it's held that only men are allowed to vote in those offices. For those offices. I need to go handle something real quick. I will be right back.
So, anybody have any questions in chat right now? Those are watching on both YouTube and Twitch, because we're dual streaming again. Those are watching. Where are y'all from? Are you watching right now on YouTube, watching on Twitch, or watching on both? Are you watching on both? What do you guys think of should the balance remain? Should federal have more power? Should states have more power? What do y'all think? Opinions. What are all your opinions while we're waiting for it?
Okay, I am back. I saw incidentally, when you were talking about paying taxes, there was no federal income tax in those days.
That was the 16th Amendment.
Yeah, that was well after, and in fact, income taxes are forbidden by the Constitution until it got amended to allow them, which was one of our smarter amendments, if you want my opinion.
Because we're talking about the election thing that some people are trying to bring back tariffs.
Yeah, which tariffs are a horrible idea that destroy economies, but that's okay.
Lower taxes by raising tariffs, apparently.
Yeah, that's yeah. People really should have looked up what a tariff was before voting and not after. But a less contentious federal versus state divide at the moment, one that's even more universally applied, and one that I am not on the side you might expect of me, is marijuana. Now, I have never used marijuana. I probably never will. The closest I've gotten was I tried an ointment for my joints at one point, and it didn't help very much. But
I've had a few cookies and gummies in my day.
You know, I've got friends who use them. I don't, mostly because I don't like how it interacts with my bipolar disorder.
Yeah, my medicine says I shouldn't either. Actually, my friend gave me a gummy one time. I was streaming, and I had to end the stream 5 minutes later because it like knocked me out. It's like I don't know what was in it, but it was like so powerful. I was falling asleep in the middle of the stream.
Yeah, no, and I've got to be really, really careful with substance use because of my bipolar disorder and because of my medication and so forth. But that includes alcohol, and I don't drink either, but I'm absolutely fine with people having a legal right to drink alcohol. I'm absolutely fine with taxed and regulated marijuana usage. So I was
going to say, because we saw what happened when we get to it, and we'll get to it in the thing when I think it was the 19th, was the 18th, was the 18th and the 21st Amendments?
Something like that, yeah. We will be getting to prohibition, and, you know, the thing is I have had many friends over the years, because I do Renaissance Fair, who homebrew. And I am perfectly okay with my friends homebrewing, just as I'm perfectly okay with my friends growing marijuana for their own personal consumption. I'm okay with my friends going to the store and buying alcohol and giving a percentage of that in taxes to their state government, just as I am with them going to a store and buying marijuana products and giving a percentage of that to their state government in the percentage in the form of taxes.
It was the thing you said you're the second state because of time zones.
Because of time zones, I live in the second state to have legalized recreational marijuana in the modern era. Colorado beat us to it because they're a time zone ahead of us. Maybe 2. No, they're 1 because they're mountain time. So their polls close first, so they win. But it was the same election. Hi. And I voted yes on legalizing marijuana in the state of Washington. I had previously voted yes on legalizing medicinal marijuana in the state of Washington. I think it's appalling that we have forbidden research. You know, we are keeping it at the highest level of protection, despite the fact that the evidence we have shows that there's no medical reason for marijuana to be protected at that level, because a handful of people in power have a thing about marijuana. And marijuana law in this country started for racist reasons. It was blacks and Hispanics were seen as using marijuana, therefore it got banned. So, that's a whole thing. But that's another one where there's this huge federal versus state divide. It is banned by the federal government, and because the federal government currently has the power to enforce drug law, the states, if the federal government decided to really step in and push the issue and make it illegal, then there's nothing that the state governments could do about it, and people would start going to prison on marijuana charges again.
Yeah, I think another one happened recently. The state federal was the Texas barbed wire situation.
Yeah. You can say hi.
Hi.
Look at you are now famous on the internet.
Yep.
Yeah, it was
the one of the big battlegrounds is the schools and what's being taught in the schools. Florida's got some ridiculous bans going on right now about things that I have already taught my own child about.
And then yes, like I say, also recently the Oklahoma stuff happening.
Yeah, which is unconstitutional. Oklahoma cannot force children to learn from a Bible. That's against the First Amendment. But they're going to try to take that power away from the federal government. And the only concern is there are people in the federal government who might agree with them, even though, repeat, unconstitutional. So, it's there's a lot of demand for local control of school district. That is my 7-year-old, Regios. She is washing glue off her hand at the moment. She was making a birthday card for a friend whose party she's going to tomorrow.
Happy birthday, random child.
And, my kids are in the public schools right now, so I've seen some of the Common Core stuff, and it's teaching a different way of doing math that's actually more intuitive for a lot of people. And the problem is that it's not the way parents were taught, and therefore parents are freaking out because they don't know how to help their kids with their homework. I wrote about the still alive great Tom Lehrer recently, and he had a song back in the 60s called New Math that is essentially the same conflict. They're teaching the math differently. I don't understand how they're teaching it, ergo the problem must be with math.
Yeah. Same thing happened with my friends learning math. My friends told me their math thing, and they're like, "What? Like what?" I was like, "What?"
Yeah. And once you, as the adult, understand how they're teaching it now, it actually makes a lot more sense than the way we were taught math. But there's this freak out about Common Core and federal control of what our children are learning. And I have college credit in banned books.
Yeah, or critical race theory.
Critical race theory, which they don't teach in your grade school, I promise. They may be teaching your child about our country's problematic racial history, but that's not the same as critical race theory, which is a much more advanced concept that is only taught at the college level. But there's a lot of, federal control of our schools, but I've studied banned books in college, and local control of schools has a lot of problems too.
Yeah.
You get...
So
I'm
the only
laughing
thing that was weird, I know it was a rumor I heard, or maybe it actually happened, but the way that this math problem set up, if you wrote 5 times 3, the answer was right, but if you wrote 3 times 5, the answer was wrong. So
and there's a reason for that, and it makes sense if you know the problem better.
Okay.
Even though, yes, it comes to the same thing, but they're trying to teach why it's structured the way it is.
Okay.
And that's what the lesson is, not in what the answer is.
That makes sense. That makes sense when you think about it. But like you said, the old math way, I grew up, what's it called? The identity, or not the identity, the associative or commutative problem where...
Yeah, the commutative property. And that still applies, and they will still teach that, but they're teaching you why we're phrasing it the way we are.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense when you think about it, but like you said, growing up, you're like A plus B equals B plus A, unless it doesn't. That's wow, it confused me a bit.
Yeah. But when I studied banned books, it was a lot of this school district was banning this text for this reason, and the reasons were almost without fail either trying to take rights away from children that they are guaranteed, or else really bad reasons. Sometimes both. The principal who tried to get the Diary of Anne Frank taken out of his schools because, and this is a direct quote, and I'm never going to forget it, it was a real downer. The Diary of Anne Frank, which I grant you, it's a downer, but it's also super important.
And historically accurate.
Yeah. And you get people trying to take books out of the schools because of religious reasons, which is unconstitutional, and current Supreme Court case law holds that children still have their First Amendment protections in school. So you can't force children to learn or not learn things based on your religion. That's illegal in this country. But there are people who are trying to get that control taken back to a local level because they know the people on the local level agree with them.
We talked about this a little bit. Bring this to a more local thing. We talked about this in our 10th Amendment thing. It's like your house is the federal government, but your daughter's room is the state government.
Yeah. Yeah. And she has certain rights in her room that I do not have the right to override. If she wants to keep her dresser in a specific place in her room, that is her choice, and she is allowed to do that. And I grant my children a right to privacy. If they are in their room with the door closed, and I don't have a very good reason for just bursting in, then I knock. And my reason had better be either, they're screaming on the other side of the door or similar, or else the house is on fire. My children have a right to privacy, and I respect it. But I am allowed to say, you have to keep your room a certain way because I'm tired of all of the dishes ending up in your room. And they have to obey that because I am the ultimate authority.
Besides Dad.
Well, okay, me and your dad are the ultimate authority. The point is, the parental authority overrides the child authority. And
override the state authority.
Yes.
In theory, at least.
Well, the Constitution overrides the state authority. And it's been a constant battle in recent years as to whether certain federal laws are constitutional or not. Because if it's a power they hold under the Constitution, they can enforce it. If it's not a power they hold under the Constitution, they can't. Where can the state override the federal? Where can the federal override the state? Is a big Supreme Court battleground these days.
All right. So, you want to learn more about that? Check out our upcoming Constitution Review series. But speaking of that, in the Constitution, the first three things are about this:
legislative versus executive versus judicial. And again, under the Articles of Confederation, there basically wasn't an executive branch. And the legislative, as established in the last part of what we were talking about here, didn't really have power. But when they agreed that there needed to be an overriding federal government with ultimate control to make it really one country instead of pretend one country, it quickly became clear that some form of executive was necessary. But these were people who had literally, in most cases, fought a war. If you look at the lives of a lot of the people at the Constitutional Convention, a lot of them had actually been soldiers in the Revolutionary War. Alexander Hamilton, who I keep coming back to, but I read a biography of him, so I know a lot of stuff about him, had been an aide under General Washington. Now, and Washington himself was at the Constitutional Convention. Benjamin Franklin hadn't fought, but Benjamin Franklin was also the oldest guy there in both rooms, both the original convention that signed the Declaration of Independence. He was already the oldest guy, and then he went on to the Constitutional Convention where he was the oldest guy. So he had not personally done fighting because nobody expected him to.
Yeah, like there was a few people that old people did, because a lot of the people who, I can mention this in the articles thing too, is the people who fought the people who did the articles were the original. I don't want to say they had the original fighters against the British, but the people, the Constitution people, the Revolution people, were like decide,
yeah,
this isn't working.
Yeah, the Articles of Confederation had mostly been signed by the people who were the politicians during the Revolution. And it was the next, not even full generation, mostly, it was the next half generation lower than them. Like, if Gen X had signed the Declaration of Independence, then the guys who were at the Constitutional Convention would have been like the Oregon Trail people.
The
the
millennials.
Xennials.
Yeah, Xennials, millennials.
Whatever you want to call them, yeah.
Not even Z.
So, let's see, 1705. So he would have been 71 at the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Ben Franklin.
I gotta bring this up real fast. Speaking of old people, we talked about the presidential thing. There hasn't even been a Gen X president yet.
There has not. It's boomers all the way down, except for the silent generation who is still in office. But anyway, Ben Franklin died in 1790 at the age of 84. So, shortly after the ratification of the Constitution, Ben Franklin dies. But, these were people who had fought in a revolution personally against tyranny, and they did not want a king, most of them. There were a few. So, that's why the powers of the executive and the legislative are so exhaustively detailed in the Constitution, because they are trying to keep them from having an ounce more authority than the document gives them. And they're trying to very clearly outline who has what power, so that, and you'll have heard the phrase in grade school, checks and balances. They wanted each branch of the federal government to hold control over the other two, so that you would never have all three branches of government trying to accomplish the same thing that they shouldn't be accomplishing.
And I think what like the states gain more power now, I think they're trying to unbalance some of that power.
Oh, this one they're definitely trying to unbalance. And it's because they're not thinking long term. Because one of the inherent problems in monarchy is, yes, you like the current monarch, but what about the one who follows him? What do you think about that guy? Because you better hope that's a good guy who does the things that you want done, because otherwise you're going to be really, really unhappy. So if, in 4 years we still have a presidential election and a Democrat takes office, the Democrat would then have the level of power they are currently willing to grant to the president they like. Now, it will be a little more complicated because currently the House and Senate are both controlled by Republicans, and the Supreme Court is overwhelmingly Republican, so it will be an issue there. But if they give the president as much power as they are willing to give the president right now, where literally nothing the president does, as long as they can pretend it's for presidential reasons, is illegal, they're not going to like the end result of that. I mean, frankly, I don't think a lot of them are going to like it with the guy they do like. I think they're going to regret that real fast, but they've backed themselves into a corner where there's nothing they can do about it. They are creating a tyrant, and it would have appalled. And this is one where I will go on the record with all of the founding fathers. Would have been absolutely horrified at the level of authority they are willing to invest in the presidency right now.
I gotta say one thing. This election and last election, not last election, but 2 years ago, did prove one thing that they taught us in school: anyone can be president.
Yeah, there's a thing that was going around Facebook that said none of us are allowed to have imposter syndrome anymore, because clearly we are all qualified to be the secretary of whatever. I certainly feel much more qualified than most of the cabinet picks I've heard. For one thing, I don't have any allegations of felonies. Especially not things like treason and sedition. So
yeah, it's like we talk about back to the balance. Well, we go on a tangent like we all usually do. So they decide, instead of like a king, one group makes them, one group, I guess, kills the laws, and one person judges the laws.
The way the three branches are set up is, first, the legislative branch passes laws. And yeah, the president has to sign them, but in theory, the veto can be overridden, and the law passes anyway because the legislature has the votes to get it passed.
Yeah.
So making the law is the responsibility of Congress.
Yeah, of course, real fast. We talk about the thing is passing majority, vetoing supermajority.
Yes, overriding a veto is supermajority.
They gotta make sure they really want that law passed.
Yeah. So then, once it becomes a law, the executive branch enforces it. And that is through cabinet departments, that is through the various law enforcement agencies, whatever it takes to make the law actually function. Whether it's, okay, we're now establishing a national parks department. So now the executive has to figure out, appoint people, appoint people to run the national parks department and set up the department that handles it and, all of that. Or whether it's, this thing is illegal, which means the executive says, okay, FBI, go deal with people who have broken this law, or whatever it takes. The Secret Service, for example, yes, they protect the president, but that's a relatively new function of theirs. The president didn't used to have official bodyguards, which we saw 3 times how well that worked out.
Because that wasn't they originally a Treasury Department for?
They are still a Treasury Department law enforcement agency. The Secret Service handles presidential protection and counterfeiting. If you are a counterfeiter, the Secret Service comes after you.
And you wouldn't. It's weird, but you wouldn't think that the bodyguards are Treasury. I said Treasury.
It's a weird combination of function, and one of these days I will look into how exactly that came to happen, because I don't understand that. I mean, I suppose it's partially because a lot of the other federal law enforcement agencies didn't exist yet when we started having real presidential bodyguards. The FBI really started to exist in the 20s and 30s. It's almost an offshoot of Prohibition. And the CIA, which is supposed to be about foreign issues anyway, is an offshoot of the World War II OSS, which, by the way, Julia Child used to work for.
Yes.
She was a CIA agent before there was a CIA.
But also like here, even if the president agrees with it, or the Senate's like, we're passing it anyways, there's the third step. The judicial department can still, it's like, nope, cut it down. Yeah. Even after that.
And the concept of judicial review is an interesting one, in as much as it's not in the Constitution. It's something that the Supreme Court established for itself, that its job is to decide if the laws are constitutional or not. I knew someone years ago who was complaining about activist judges and who gave them the power to decide that, laws were constitutional or not. It's like, well, John Jay actually, this is an old, no, it's not in the Constitution, but we've just kind of accepted it as true for over 2 centuries now, and I guess we could change it, but it's a good system and we're all willing to go along with it. So, and it is an important job of being able to interpret the Constitution. Now, I do believe that some of our current justices interpret it incorrectly, and I think they're being big, fat, staring hypocrites about it. I'd really love to get Clarence Thomas to explain to me why Loving v. Virginia is valid case law, but Griswold v. Connecticut isn't.
what's that thing people say? Thomas doesn't want to be the next. Was it Tawny?
No, it's Thomas has no problem with being the next Tawny. It's Roberts who doesn't want to be the next Tawny.
Oh.
Roberts being, of course, the Chief Justice. Tawny, for those who are unaware, was the Supreme Court Justice in the years before and during the Civil War. He was a piece of work. He is one of the worst Supreme Court justices in U.S. history. I am looking up exactly when he died. Yeah, he died in 1864.
Was he still did he stay in the Union during the Civil War, or did he leave the Confederates?
He was from Maryland, so he stayed because his state stayed. And he is most famous, or infamous if you'd rather, for writing the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott being one of those Supreme Court cases that you should have learned about in grade school, because it is from just before the Civil War, and Buchanan thought that it was going to prevent the Civil War, and then this finding comes out that says that not only does this man not have the right to sue for his freedom, Black people have no rights which white people are obliged to respect. That's in a Supreme Court decision, that phrasing. I don't think he phrased it exactly that way, but I'm also pretty sure I don't want to read it the way he phrased it. Yeah. There are some running for the worst, but Tawny tops most lists.
And that, like I said, with more detail, that's one of the things that they brought up in the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. Yeah. The case in question was, there was an enslaved man by the name of Dred Scott, who had been
in a taken to a free state.
Yeah. He was born in Missouri. Oh no, he was born in Virginia. We're not sure if Dred was his actual first name. His name could have been Ethelred, but sure. He was then taken to Alabama. Then they gave up farming and moved to Missouri. Then he was sold to a surgeon in the army. And then he was taken to Illinois. He took him to Minnesota. He took him to Wisconsin. And then he took him to Louisiana. And back to Missouri. And then he died in the Iowa Territory, and his wife inherited the property, and that included this slave family. And they finally went, wait a minute, we've been in a whole bunch of free states and territories. Why are we still slaves? And they sued for their freedom on the grounds of they shouldn't have been legally permitted to be taken into those territories where slavery was illegal. And President Buchanan, our 15th and by some standards worst, although I'll give him bottom 5, but I won't give him worst.
Yeah, I think in terms of 19th century presidents, it's like between him and Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Johnson are the three big. One of these guys is the worst, but who you think is the worst says more about how you view things than anything else.
Yeah, just real fast, I guess, because we're going here. Then I think 20th century, I have to say, I'm at top 3 there, but I think Wilson is definitely one of the.
Wilson gets cited a lot. Hoover gets cited a lot. Obviously, Nixon gets cited a lot.
Yeah, Hoover. I think sometimes Hoover gets blamed for the. I don't think Hoover. I think his is more of a timing thing for him. I don't know for maybe not. I think he only. I think maybe if I think it happened there, he been forgettable presidents.
Yeah, and I think Coolidge gets a lot of slack for not having actually been in office when a lot of stuff he set up fell apart. So, you know.
And Nixon was bad too, but I give him some credit for the EPA thing and some of that stuff. You know, a lot of the stuff he did was bad. At least he wasn't one of the climate denier presidents that we have now.
Presidents is one where I will do it on a tier list. And Nixon, I will give a solid F tier, but he's joined at the bottom with like Jackson and another one who doesn't come up nearly enough is Harding. Harding was a terrible president, ridiculously corrupt.
At least in my opinion, and this current thing, I think you might know who my pick is for 21st century presidents.
Yes, well, the 21st century has not been. Let's say that the first quarter of the 21st century is going to be very unevenly viewed by historians.
So far, we only had 4 choices.
Yes, but Tawney is, by almost all standards, the worst Supreme Court justice. I'm not sure I've heard anyone else ranked below him. Simply because, well, he was kind of evil. I mean, it wasn't even like corruption or anything like that. He was just, from what I could tell, a bad person. He considered slavery to be evil and freed them, but also, you know.
Yeah, I think that Green overruled, was it that court case overruled the Missouri Compromise, saying there should be no free versus states.
Yeah,
there were no free states.
Tawney wanted the Missouri Compromise to be overthrown because he didn't believe the federal government had the power to control slavery in any way, which would have opened the territories up for slavery, and there would have been nothing the federal government could have done about it. It was basically Tawney really was one of the matches that lit the Civil War. And it is generally agreed that it doesn't matter what else he found. It doesn't matter what other opinions he held or wrote. Dred Scott is going to sink him for all time. And I think Roberts has been living in fear his whole stint as Chief Justice of being Tawney. And I think that the opinion that is going to link him to Tawney in history is holding that everything the president does is legal. Because I think that is contrary to the spirit of the Constitution.
Yeah, doesn't override what they did in the Nixon case.
Well, Nixon never went to trial.
Well, I thought that there was a case to report.
There was a case that held that evidence had to be released, but before it was ever determined whether Nixon could be put on trial for what he had done, Gerald Ford pardoned him.
No, true. But I meant the case where they said the president isn't above the law.
Oh, yeah, no. So Nixon was very fond of saying that, but it was never fully tested in the courts.
Oh, I thought there was a court case about that.
No. The Nixon situation happened so quickly. It went from everything got revealed to it looked like he was going to be impeached to he resigned to Ford pardoned him so quickly that the court cases never really had time to be developed.
Because I thought there was, sorry, I'm misremembering. Because I thought I'm pretty sure I saw this on Mr. Beat's book. I got Mr. Beat's court cases, and there's the whole case about how he tried to withhold the evidence. The Supreme Court said he couldn't.
Yeah. It was found that he couldn't withhold evidence. And in that sense, he wasn't above the law.
Okay.
But before it could be settled by the Supreme Court whether or not he could be tried for what he did, because the evidence he was withholding not from a court, but from Congress.
Okay.
It was leading up to his inevitable impeachment that he was trying to withhold this evidence. He was trying to withhold it from the Congress. And the Supreme Court found that he couldn't do that. But before he could have gone to a criminal court, he was pardoned. So it never got fully settled under Nixon. Good Gesundheit.
There it is. I found it. U.S. versus Nixon.
Yes.
So one makes the laws, one carries them out, other one says
yes
or no.
And the whole point is to prevent anyone from being, not only prevent anyone from being above the law, but prevent any one person from controlling the entire country. Yeah. The current hero worship we're seeing, and my daughter and I went to lunch this afternoon, and the people at the next table at the Dairy Queen, the father of the family was saying that it was only I forget how many days, because I'm trying not to remember, and then they were going to hold a party when Trump got into office. And like the level of hero worship that we're seeing from a lot of people on the right is antithetical to the spirit of the separation of powers.
And there's that term there that I've heard you say there, and I've heard it from what's his name? I forget his name, but he talks about a lot about the worship of Trump. Literally, some people.
Yeah. I'm not sure who I've heard several people talk about it, and it's there. It's alarming. And then they get all confused when you tell them that you didn't really like Biden very much. Like, would I have voted for Biden in the primaries if I had had a better choice? I would not have. But he was the choice I had, so he was who I voted for. I was much happier about voting for Harris.
Telltale's his name, Owen Morgan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's the one that...
There was a certain amount of worship of George Washington from a very early time in the nation's history as a separate country. And it is true that he was talked into being president not once but twice because of the belief that if he hadn't accepted the job, people would assume that it was because he didn't believe the country was going to hold together. In order to show the confidence that everyone at the convention had known he felt in the Constitution, he had to be president. And then in order to show his confidence that the nation was able to continue under the Constitution, he had to be president again. He didn't want to be president. He just wanted to go home, but there it was.
But
So,
the third time he's like, no.
The third time he was like, no, I've done it twice. I'm going home now. You can't stop me. And they agreed, and, you know,
and people were like,
John Adams became president, and
people were like, oh my God, that's a great role model to have. Only two
yeah,
times.
and from that point on, the only president we've had who served more than 2 terms, I would argue, had extenuating circumstances. Because it would be very, very hard to be Franklin Roosevelt after your second term.
Of course, not that some of them didn't. Some of them didn't try.
Yes, well, very few of them actually did try. Theodore Roosevelt tried, but he had only been elected once, and it was a whole thing. But I mean, I picture to myself being Franklin Roosevelt in 1940 and looking at Europe and looking at Asia and looking at the isolationist, in many cases, literally pro-German movement in your own country and thinking to yourself, no, nobody else is going to get this country ready for war the way it needs to be gotten ready for war. And you run again. And then it's 1944, and what do you do?
Now we're in the war.
Right, exactly. Like, I need to see this, especially because he knew about the Manhattan Project. So, you know, I've got to see this through, and then he just dies. So, that did happen. But
by the way, did he, off topic, did he die of polio or?
No. No. Cerebral hemorrhage, I believe, is the official cause of death. It may have been related to his polio, but the fact that he had been a sitting president for more than 12 years didn't help, I will tell you that. Being president is hard work.
Hey, is there I don't know if you do, this is black and white color that, but is there like did he have not gray hair pre and gray hair afterwards, like the current president, or do we have colored photos to prove that or not?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we have color photos from 1932.
You can compare some of the presidents before and after.
Yeah, no, being president ages you. Let's see. That's 1930. I would say he had darkish gray hair when he took office. But it's hard to tell. I don't see any color pictures.
It's hard to tell for our last 2 presidents, too.
Yeah, well, because his hair started orange and is still orange. And then Biden he's always had gray hair. Actually, no, I remember Biden with brown hair, but I was fairly young at the time.
Yeah, but yeah, I saw the Bush and Obama before and after.
Yeah, Obama, the look in Obama when he took office and when he left office, and then nowadays, he's starting to look a lot better again. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it.
And I think I remember a little bit of Clinton too.
Yeah.
His daughter was about my age when he had run for office. We still technically daughter's still my age. But.
Yeah, Chelsea is, how old is Chelsea? She was born in 1980. So
yeah, but I was December 79, so about that.
yeah, she's about my younger sister's age. And she's named after a Joni Mitchell song because that's the Clintons. That's
But yeah, like I said, they were old enough to have kids my age when I was running for president, and then now they're 8 years later, they're like grandparents. They look like grandparents.
Yeah. But even this idolization of Washington from roughly 1800 was very, very different because there was never a belief that everybody needed to do exactly what Washington said all the time. And that it was just little short of blasphemous to disagree. You couldn't completely and totally destroy your political career by disagreeing with George Washington. Also, George Washington never threatened to hang John Adams, so there's that.
Is a rumor about that?
No, I'm just saying, vice presidents and yeah. I mean, John Adams was, as we all know, obnoxious and disliked, but he wasn't that obnoxious and disliked. John Adams, you can add to your list of if he had said that that the sky was blue, at least a couple of guys would have checked the window.
Yeah, of course. I guess he had to be some kind of popular because he got second, at least in that current election, the first 3 or 4 elections. He popular enough to get the second votes for president.
Yeah, but the other founding fathers, by and large, didn't like him. He got along pretty well with Thomas Jefferson until they had a major split about politics, at which point they didn't speak for many years, and then they were friends again later. Yeah. But John Adams was not good at not speaking his mind. So he was abrasive.
Yeah. Check the Boston Massacre court case.
Yeah. He defended the and this is a major part of the idea of balance of powers. Honestly, the idea that even people as reviled as the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre deserved a defense and were found not guilty for the most part because it was self-defense. If a lot of people in authority among the colonials had been in power, then had been able to say what happened to those soldiers, then they would not have been found not guilty. And if the crown had been able to prevent a trial, it probably would have.
Yeah. Probably, if some people that probably wouldn't have gone to a trial, they would have probably hanged them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, if there were a lot of people who would have very happily lynched those men. But also, the crown would have very happily prevented them from going on trial in the first place. So, a lot of living memory events shaped the idea of a balance of powers. And some that were no longer living memory. Every once in a while I have to bring up Charles I and parliamentary shenanigans, because no, those weren't living memory to the founding fathers, but they weren't as distant as all that.
A little bit more than 100 years, maybe 150 years.
Yeah, I'm looking up. I can never remember exactly when because it's not my era.
I think it's 1640, maybe 30s.
Charles the First died on January 30th, 1649.
I was right.
Yeah, so literally 140 years between the execution of Charles the First and the ratification of the Constitution.
So yeah, by that point, they still had some power, but slowly at that point, the British monarch still had some power, but the Parliament was a little bit more power.
But the English Civil War was closer in time to the Founding Fathers than the American Civil War is to us now. So let's contemplate a minute how much of how we see our country right now is shaped by the U.S. Civil War. And think about, therefore, how much their view of government had to have been shaped by the English Civil War. And remember that the crime that Charles I was executed for was tyranny. That was what the charge was. So,
yeah,
when I say that a fear of tyranny is woven all through the Constitution, yeah, that's why.
Yeah, what was the saying? Like he said, they said you're not about the government, and he said, I am the government.
Yeah. It turns out that he wasn't. So, when the balance of powers was written into the Constitution, it was because on the one hand, they didn't want a Charles I or even a Charles II, who I'm much fonder of, but who definitely swayed a little bit further towards tyranny than was probably safe for him, all things considered. Spending a lot of years in the French court will do that to you.
Yeah, and also this point, he had power, but did George III actually still have the power we think he did, or is it the Parliament had the power at this?
The balance hadn't swung all the way to where it is now by any stretch. And let's be very clear that the balance of power in the UK is almost at the far extreme. Charles III is not a figurehead, but he's really close to being a figurehead. So power wasn't quite there yet. George III, and as a regent, George IV, had considerably more power than Charles III does today. But it was still very, very much more in the control of Parliament than it would have been under, Elizabeth I, for example.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was with you about this. I think it wasn't even until George V that the Parliament actually got the power to appoint their own prime minister.
Yeah, it's and I don't know a lot about the history of the English Parliament. That's not something I've put a lot of study into. And the thing about history, for people who are unaware, is there's a lot of it. And either you are a generalist and you know a lot of things about a lot of things and nothing very much about any one thing in particular, or else you're really good at one or two subjects and can kind of vamp your way through a lot of others.
Yeah.
And I'm in category 2.
Yeah, I'm a, what they call it, jack of all. I can like that. I'm like jack of all trades, master of none.
I'm really, really good at Elizabethan history. I'm really, really good at the U.S. Civil War. I'm fairly good at Holocaust history. And beyond that, I do a lot of vamping.
So,
And I know how to research so I can look up the stuff that I need to know.
yeah, again, I'll tell you again, like Jack of all trades, master of none. It's like when certain YECers try to put science and evolution all in one basket.
Yeah. And so when you hear me, it's like how, Erica is constantly saying, well, I'm not a geneticist, I'm not whatever. That's kind of what I'm doing when I say, well, I'm not an expert in that thing. Like, I know probably a little bit more than most people, but I know I don't know enough to speak with any kind of authority about it.
Like I said, I love it. I love it when they how can you explain evolution when the Big Bang says this and the rock records say that? And nothing to do with evolution.
Because neither of those two things are evolution. Yeah. And I'm very much not a scientist, but I know more about science than a lot of young Earth creationists, which is a low bar that I have just stepped over. But so you look at the swinging balance of Parliament, and you look at Charles I and the failed experiment of the Great Protector. The Lord Protector almost certainly factored in, because arguably Oliver Cromwell was the elected king that a few of the founding fathers had suggested as a head of the executive branch. Well, what happened when Oliver Cromwell died? They didn't have an election. They appointed his son, who turned out to be terrible at the job and so got deposed, and Charles II came in and restored the monarchy.
And I think also with I think my sister we did, but some people also with Oliver, they're like he I think he focused more on religion balance. We'll take that later, but he more, sometimes he might have been even more stricter about certain things than the king was.
Oh yeah. Oliver Cromwell was a very, very specific kind of religious, and expected everyone else to be religious in the same way. There are a lot of churches across the British Isles that had priceless works of art destroyed during the rule of Oliver Cromwell because of his feeling about graven images. He was the kind of Protestant that didn't want art, or at least didn't want sacred art. So it's a whole thing. And all of that is in the history that the founding fathers would have grown up learning. Because it wasn't in their living memory, and it wasn't in their parents' living memory, but you're getting to grandparents, and there are one or two, and by great-grandparents, it's pretty regularly in that living memory. Yeah. So almost all of the founding fathers would have known at least one person who was at least a child during the reign of Charles II.
Yeah. And I think our parents, or maybe even our grandparents, were alive during the 60s and
all four of my grandparents were born right around the beginning of World War I. That was, when I was a child, my family's living memory. My mother was born in 1944, so, my mom doesn't remember World War II, but she grew up right in its aftermath.
Yeah, and she grew up in the civil rights era.
Yeah. My mom denies having told me this, but one of my mother's childhood crushes was Guy Williams playing Zorro on the Disney Zorro in the 50s. My mother was around for the rise of television as mass media.
My mom was a Elvis fan. the
Oh,
50s.
my mom too. My mom too. My mom loves Elvis and the Beach Boys and considers the Beatles too young and hip. So, yeah. But that's, that kind of generational thing was what was going on with the Founding Fathers. They would have grown up on stories of what it had been like in the Civil War and Restoration. Even though no one they knew would have really lived through those things, it would have been the stories their grandparents told them about their own grandparents. That level of thing. And it's hard to kind of think of history that way for us, I think, because the English Civil War and the Revolution and all of those things are just lumped in our heads as a long time ago. And it can be hard to put it into any kind of chronology. The one I personally have a really hard time with is the San Francisco earthquake.
1903 or
1906. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake happened the year after Einstein first published on the subject of relativity.
Yeah.
Because that was 1905. And my brain will not process this fact.
Yeah, time is weird because I think there's two sayings. One, the both time thing. One's more local. I won't say local, but the two of them was Cleopatra lived closer to us than she did the building of the pyramids.
Yes.
And the other one was T-Rex lived closer to us than it did the Stegosaurus.
Yes. Oxford University is older than the Aztec Empire. I think it's older than the Mayan Empire. So yeah, so time is really hard for us to really think about that way. But it is true that stories of the English Civil War would have been, to most of the founders' generation, what stories of... Oh gosh, what's a big event that's... Maybe like stories of World War I would be to my kids. I mean, let's really stop and think about that. That's how close everything is in time. So when they have this strict balance of power and this strict, checks and balances and separations and all of these things, that's because they would have known on a much, much more intimate level than we realize what happens when those checks and balances go wrong. And so when they separate the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, that's to make sure there are no tyrants. Nobody in any of those three branches has the constitutional authority to become a tyrant.
All right. So now moving on. Your questions say in the comments below or in the live chat, but moving on. We talked about this a little bit in the Parliament a bit, but going a little bit more closer, there's the balance between the Senate and the House, or Parliament would be that Lords and the Commons. Yeah,
the parallel is the Lords and the Commons. You were originally not supposed to vote for your own senator. That was chosen by your state legislature. You were not supposed to worry about how long they were in office because you didn't control it anyway. And you voted for your representative, and your representative was much more likely to be someone you knew personally in those days because districts were so much smaller and the voting population was so much smaller. The odds
30,
of my walking...
30,000, 30,000 compared to 800,000 now.
Yeah. The odds of my walking down the street and running into Marilyn Strickland, my member of the U.S. House of Representatives, are slim to none, not least because she lives, 20, 30 miles north of me. But in the colonial, in the early days of the Constitution, if I were a a voter in Manhattan, the odds of my running into my representative would have been much higher because the House of Representatives was proportionally much smaller. Proportionally, there were a lot more representatives than there are now.
But talking about this thing a little bit, except for a few things like money, like taxes and money, a lot of the power lied in the upper house or the Senate or the House of Lords.
Yeah, because they were people like us, dear. Most of the people writing the Constitution would have seen themselves as becoming senators. And they still wanted the power to go to the elite. However, they didn't want the elite to become a tyranny either. And so there is the balance of the House of Representatives is theoretically the house that sets the budget. They hold what has always been known as the power of the purse. And they, more than any other of the separated powers, the Senate and the House have to work together to get things done. Because the version of a bill that goes to the president has to be agreed on in its wording by both houses. It's not like the president gets to choose between the House's version and the Senate's version. Eventually, they've got to come to a compromise where that is the final version that gets sent on.
But the Senate, even today, the Senate has the power. The Senate declares war. I think not the House, or is it both of them?
Even though we spend all this time going over it, I don't at the moment remember. Yes, we can move on from Charles the First now. Thank you. Yeah, it doesn't say, it just says Congress has the power to declare war.
Okay. But not confined. The Senate has to approve the cabinets. The Senate has to approve the justices. The Senate has to approve treaties.
Yeah. Most of the work where it's specified which house it's going to do it, it's the Senate, because the Senate is the upper house, and it is the longer serving house, because they're in for 6 years as opposed to 2, which means they know how everything works better than the average representative, at least in theory.
We talked about before, the Senate wasn't chosen by us commerce. It was more of a, I guess they were kind of chosen by us, but they were chosen approximately. We chose this house, we chose the state people, and the state people chose them. So
yeah, we were at a remove from selecting senators, and that was, again, clearly by design. That was clearly because the people who were elites in a given state would then make the decision about who the elites in the federal government were going to be. And the Electoral College fits into that as well, with the whole, and then you don't even technically vote for president, the Electoral College decides. So,
and again, it goes back to their federal state thing.
Yeah. And again, this is, they have to work much more closely together. They are more two halves of the same coin than two separate coins not next to each other, the way a lot of the other balances are. But they do have to balance in order for the government to work the way it's intended.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know. Yes, I don't know. I don't think that, I could be wrong, but I don't think the Senate is as royal as it used to be.
No, it's really not. You almost have to be rich in order to run for Congress in the United States these days, simply because the cost of running for office is so high. With campaign spending being as high as it is and the campaign season being as long as it is, it's hard to get any traction if you aren't coming at it from a position of wealth, which is horrible and something we need to fix, but is true. But because it's true, it means that there's not quite as much prestige in the Senate as there used to be. And I mean, it is worth noting that when John Quincy Adams lost his re-election bid, he went to the House of Representatives and not the Senate, and lived the rest of his life as a representative. But the Adamses had a weird kind of not quite patrician, not quite plebeian streak in them anyway, so don't judge anyone by what an Adams does.
But also, another thing I remember, you mentioned Quincy. I guess another thing the House had power over the Senate at the time, I still do, is the first election, Quincy Adams, he won because the House said he won.
Yeah. The House of Representatives is the one that decides elections in the case of no majority anywhere. Which the Founding Fathers thought would happen a lot more, but as we established in some of our pre-recorded stuff, the political situation changed radically between the writing of the document and its ratification.
It's like it only happened one time that we know. That I can remember. That was Andrew Jackson's loss.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, one of the guys that running decided Henry Clay.
Yeah, threw his support over, even though, none of them could be members of the Electoral College based on the Constitution. When it got thrown into the House of Representatives, that changed everything.
What was it called? The corrupt bargain?
The corrupt bargain, yeah. And like how corrupt it is, there's a whole lot to get into.
Because that's about the guy who lost that.
Yeah. And I grant you that I am always going to side with John Quincy Adams over Andrew Jackson. Almost said Charles Jackson, who's a very different bad Jackson.
Also, look, we talked about this thing, but this was a compromise called the Great Compromise.
Yeah.
It's a bounce.
Yeah. We talked about it a lot in the pre-record stuff, but so much of the document is based on compromise simply because that was the only way the document was going to get written and ratified. It took enormous amounts of compromise, some of them better than others. No prizes for naming the worst compromise in the document. But the separation of powers, the balance of the Senate and the House, the structure of the Senate and the House, the structure of the executive, those are all based on enormous amounts of compromise, and you can tell that there wasn't much conflict about the Supreme Court because there's practically no detail in the Constitution about what the Supreme Court should look like, because everybody agreed, yes, we should have one of those.
This one, it was like the bigger states were like, we're more popular, we should have more power. The smaller states were like, no, equal power.
Yeah, we don't want to be overwhelmed, the power should be equal. And so the compromise is one house is by proportion and one is, equal representation. And the problem is because the House of Representatives has not grown in a very long time, even the proportional representation is no longer proportional.
Yeah. I think it's not that funny, but that they gave the equal, at the time at least, they gave the power of the equal one to the state governments.
Yeah.
I guess then they're holdover from that. Like,
well, it's more compromise because everything in the Constitution is compromise.
I guess right there, but the final one is not really a balance of power, but separation, but kind of it, and it's
church and state. Yeah. Well, and in the original colonial days, that was a balance of power. More so in New England than in the more southern colonies. But in New England, the church and state were two extremely powerful forces. And they learned what happened when you let the church have its way too much with the Salem witch trials, which were not the only witch trials in colonial New England, but were the last major witch trials in colonial New England because they went so far. And one of the reasons they went as far as they did was that spiritual evidence was admitted, which meant that you could say, well, I know that they're a witch because I see their spirit doing such and such, and that was admitted in a court of law. And obviously these days, if you tried that, it would get thrown out because that is insane. But in the colonial days, the people who first came over to Plymouth Colony and the other colonies, as we talked about in the Mayflower Compact, these were people who were fleeing from religious persecution and wanted the authority to establish their own kind of religious persecution. And so you do get some of the other states would eventually, some of the other colonies would eventually be set up in the name of wider religious freedom. Connecticut, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Maryland were the big ones in that sense.
Yeah, we mentioned this in our finale, the Mayflower Compact, about the Puritans and the Pilgrims and why they came over here.
Yeah, and we talked about some of this in our talk about the First Amendment and the pre-recorded stuff because it's all connected. But a lot of the smaller states literally, and two of the big ones, literally existed from people who wanted freedom from an oppressive state religion. Now, Massachusetts technically, yes, but what the original colonists of Massachusetts decided was that it meant that they needed to be the ones to be oppressing people, and the other ones were founded as, therefore, no oppression. And that's another balance that's been running through U.S. history is, therefore, we should oppress versus, therefore, no oppression.
Yeah, and we talked about the article thing, the 13 separate country things. Mm-hmm. Each state had their, pretty much, give or take, 13 separate churches.
Yeah. You get Episcopalians, you get Baptists. Pennsylvania was very, very heavily Quaker. Maryland was very, very heavily Catholic. And it all varied so wildly. And so as they're coming together as a country, it's like, we can't have a national religion, A, because we have seen how badly that goes, because the 30 Years' War had happened by that point, and millions of people had died in the name of religion in, I think that one was living memory. And B, because whose religion gets to be in charge, which is one that...
I think
I'm wrong. That was 1618 to 1648, so that wasn't living memory.
Around the same time as the Charles situation.
So it's around the same time as the settlement of the colonies. So I'm wrong. But still, like I said, it's as far distant from them as a lot of this other stuff is for us. So they knew what it looked like when countries went to war over religion. And they didn't want that. And they couldn't have a national religion because there would not have been a ratification about which religion it was. That was never going to have passed. And I hate to tell evangelicals this, but their religion is not going to be a one that would pass if you got a nationwide vote on religion today.
Yeah. Another thing they're trying to go back on is this thing too.
Yeah.
People were like,
yeah, they'll
saying
tell you
that it was always this way.
Yeah, no. And then they'll try to claim all of the founding fathers as being of their religion when their religion didn't exist yet and wouldn't for decades.
What was the thing you said about they voted for Thomas Jefferson because they thought he was an atheist instead of...
Yeah, there was a Baptist congregation that the preacher told his parish to vote for Thomas Jefferson over John Adams because John Adams was an Episcopalian and Thomas Jefferson was an atheist, which he wasn't, but by Baptist standards, I guess. And they felt the Baptist or the atheist would leave them alone more than the Episcopalian would and let them be Baptists. And Baptists in those days were not the same as Baptists today. So even modern Baptists were not religious in the way that people were in those days. That doesn't happen until after the First and Second Great Awakenings, and we haven't had those yet at the point at which the Constitution was written. So, separation of church and state is a huge founding principle, and in Massachusetts, the intention was to protect the church from the state. They didn't want them to be the same thing because they didn't want the state to be able to tell you what your conscience should be telling you. The branch of Protestantism that came into the United States with the early colonists was very much your own conscience should be your God.
Because it was at this time it was like 200 years ago. The 1500s, so it was 250 years ago that the Protestant Reformation started happening.
Yeah, Protestant Reformation starts with Martin Luther. And let's see when Martin Luther died real quick. I know he was alive at this, 1546. So Martin Luther was alive at the same time. I mean, his teachings are part of what caused Henry VIII to claim the authority to separate from Rome when Elizabeth I was born.
Yeah,
so
and also at the same time, but like both, as like the Puritans were to the Church of England, technically at first both Luther and Henry VIII did technically they still want to remain Catholic. They just want to be pure.
Yeah,
they want to break away. They want to just like the pure, like quote, purify it.
Yeah, Martin Luther died a year before Henry VIII did. So a lot of this stuff that's really abstract to people today, or in many cases simply forgotten entirely, was much more immediate to the people in those days. And because state religion was a real and present concept, more people knew what it was like to be legally prosecuted, not persecuted, legally prosecuted for following the guidance of your own conscience. And it was happening less and less often, but you could still be fined for not going to church.
And the right church.
And the right church. and to this day, you can't be Catholic and inherit the throne of the United Kingdom. You
Until
can't now
recently,
be married to a Catholic.
yeah. So recently, you can marry one. You can do that now, but
And that would have been under James II that they passed the law about how you couldn't even well, it would have been after James II, but and James II died in 1701.
Act of settlement.
Yeah.
Yeah, two of those things. Well, two of those things the two things that recently upgraded overthrew was, one, you can marry a Catholic now, and two, women get the order of birth, not just men first.
Yeah. James II died 5 years before Benjamin Franklin was born. So the Glorious Revolution was living memory in Benjamin Franklin's lifetime.
Yeah. 1688.
Yeah. He knew people who would have been he knew a lot of people who would have been around for the Glorious Revolution. So he would have had secondhand experience of major sectarian violence over what a lot of people today would consider the same religion. Not everyone. A lot of people, don't think Catholics and Protestants are the same religion, but they are both forms of Christianity.
Yeah, just like before that, it was the Catholics and the Orthodox war.
Yeah, it was something that they knew a lot about in a way that
it's funny. I saw this video about this. I joke, but people ask what the Orthodox thought about the president. Like we don't care. They're both heretics.
Yeah, opinion. Exactly. So, the separation of church and state was very, very important on both a political and a religious level to most people in the colonies in those days. And the reason people are able to forget that is because they've never had to live in a situation where we didn't have it. And because they think their religion is going to be the one on top.
Yeah, it's like back to the First Amendment thing about how the school prayer thing.
Mm-hmm.
They want to bring school. They want to bring school. People, they say they want to bring school prayer back to school, and they mean is they want to bring enforced prayer back to school because they
want to bring their kind of enforced prayer back to schools.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing is I was a Christian back in school, and I prayed in school. No one stopped me from praying. No one stopped me from reading the Bible in school.
Yeah,
but the teachers couldn't force us to.
Now, a teacher could require you to read the Bible in a comparative religion class if you chose to take a comparative religion class. There would be a certain extent to which you could be forced to read the Bible in a literature class because, it is relevant to a lot of Western literature. There's an extent to which you could be forced to read certain amounts of it in a history class when it's relevant to the history that's being taught.
I think, but now it's not more of like at that point. It's more of a college level than that. Or that would still be high school.
Yeah.
But teacher can't be like, you know what? Let's pray to our God. And I think people they'd be like, "Oh, let's do it," and they would have a lot more opinion about it if all of a sudden the people in power, like, were, say, Hindus or Islam or Buddhists.
Yeah, no, if I were able to force their children to call the corners as a pagan, we'd hear a lot less of demands for prayer in schools. Now, I wouldn't do that because it's against my religion to force other people to practice my religion. But there's a certain irony in that, I think. So yeah, the separation of church and state is a much more important guiding principle. And no, it's never phrased in exactly those words in the Constitution. But it does say in the body of the text itself that no religious test for office shall exist in the United States. And it does say that you have that Congress shall pass no laws regarding the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. And as we know, the 14th Amendment means that states can't do it either. There's very bad case law right now that holds that children can absolutely decide not to participate in a prayer that their coach leads. Thank you, Kitsap County. But you can't even be forced to say the Pledge of Allegiance because it violates Jehovah's Witnesses' belief that they don't say oaths of that kind. Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to be fully separate from politics and aren't even supposed to vote.
Yeah, we talked about that. The other thing we talked about in our review is a lot of the Constitution that they say both oath or
affirmation, because some of the founding fathers were of religions where they couldn't swear oaths. So they put that in there to cover everybody. I'm not going to say there weren't religious bigots among the founding fathers, because I'm quite certain there were. But I am going to say that there were fewer religious bigots than modern day religious bigots would like to have you believe. And that includes the anti-theists, in my opinion.
But yeah, but today, I think a lot of people are trying to either disbalance the power or smash them back together into one thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of people in this country who openly want a theocracy.
Yeah, be it church or state, be it the three branches of the government, being House, Senate, be it the state, federal, they're trying to unbalance it.
Yeah,
in all four topics. What do you think is the worst of the four of the balancing? What do you think is the most serious problem, in your opinion, right now? Of the four.
Right balances? Now, I think the biggest one is the unbalancing of the checks and balances, because I think all of the others follow from that unbalancing. I think that right now our federal government is very, very strongly unbalanced in the direction of people who don't like any of these. And they're all working together across all three branches. They want their religion to be the ultimate law of the land, and they want to do it regardless of what everything else in the country says. Regardless of the rule of law and the will of the people.
Like you said, like that brings, like, we don't care what your state says about this. We want this or. And
we don't care what the First Amendment says. We don't care what the 14th Amendment says. We don't care what your state says. We don't care what the body of the Constitution says about the powers of the individual branches. This is what we want. And we are going to get it because we have elected in a guy who everybody is willing to follow.
Hence, if you haven't heard about yet, Project 2025.
Yes. Project 2025 is the ultimate planned unbalancing of the U.S. Constitution. We have not seen anything like this since in the days leading up to World War II, there was actually a planned coup against Franklin Roosevelt. And before that, the Civil War.
I think before that was Guy Fawkes.
Yeah. Remember, folks, Guy Fawkes was a Catholic bigot. Oh, see, Eddie, I remember exactly the last time I went to church because it was midnight mass, Christmas 2000, the last time I went home to visit my mom. And I was in excruciating back pain, and my mom made me stay all through mass anyway. Yeah. I might have gone to a bit of midnight mass with my sister the next year and then gone home because we didn't care, but I'm pretty sure it was Christmas 2000.
Mine was 2011.
Yeah. And the thing is under the Constitution, I don't have to go to church. I've raised my kids with no strong sense of religion, and they don't have to have one. There are Bibles in our household because I find them interesting from a historical and literary perspective, but there's no one in our household who respects them as a holy document of God, and we don't have to. One of the Bibles in my house is the Brick Testament, which is the Bible told with pictures made of Legos.
Yeah, let alone a historical or a science document.
Yeah, it's definitely not either of those. And I'm in good company about this because Thomas Jefferson, I've told this story many times, I will tell it many more. Thomas Jefferson published a Bible leaving out the parts that he called, and I quote, the obvious exaggerations of Jesus' biographers. And one of the parts he left out was the resurrection. Thomas Jefferson did not believe in the resurrection. And he didn't have to. This is why that church thought he was an atheist. But he didn't have to, and he could still believe in a concept of God. It just wasn't, under any conceivable definition, a Christian concept of God, and certainly not an evangelical Christian concept. And the way our country has been structured, we have the right to believe what we want to, and vote how we want to, and speak the way we want to. And our government is fully independent, and there are no tyrants.
Yeah. And
the biggest threat to our country right now is people who want to install a tyrant. And the people behind that tyrant who want a theocracy.
And you so say, I would say opinion, not really kind of opinion, but yeah, I would say that you think if one of these things, if this one disrupts, the other three will disrupt too.
Yeah. Yeah. They all depend on one another. The second you allow a church to be in charge, then the separations don't exist because they all have to respect what the church says. The separation of the three branches is vital because if they're not separate, then it leads toward, at best, oligarchy. The state and federal, I'm less concerned about state and federal, but it is true that some states' rights are a protection against federal tyranny, and some federal rights are a protection against state tyranny.
Or even down to the local or
even down to the local. Yeah. Get Southern racists started on Reconstruction, which by and large was intended to prevent tyranny over Black people. That's what Reconstruction was for, was to address tyranny. And the division between the two houses of Congress, again, I'm less concerned about that, but it is intended to broaden the number of people who have a say to prevent tyranny.
It was important 200 years ago, and it's still important now.
Yes. The threat of tyranny is there. And it is your obligation as an American citizen to keep up these separations to prevent tyranny from winning. I don't want a tyrant who agrees with me. Let's make that very clear. This is not about, I don't like Orange Man because he's a Republican. This is about tyranny bad. Regardless of the tyrant, tyranny is always bad.
Yeah. Yeah, no matter what party it is, what this is like. I didn't agree with everything Biden did either. I'm like,
no, I could get me started on some of the things I disagreed with Biden about. I disagreed with Harris about some things. And I fully expect that whoever runs in 4 years, assuming we have an election in 4 years, I'll disagree with them too. Because there is no such thing as a candidate who agrees with everything I want unless I run for office, and I'm not running for office.
Yeah, like I said, we're a democracy, not a Star Trek thing, a Borg.
Yeah, we are not a collective. We are all individuals. So, stay informed, keep voting, and keep fighting tyranny. It's the only way we're going to get through this.
In 2 years, we'll see if we can rebalance stuff.
Yeah, in 2 years, it will be shocking if the balance doesn't shift.
Any last words to say?
No, I think that's pretty much where I am at this point.
Yep. Yep. Remember these things. Learn these things, and be sure to watch our review of the Constitution uploading soon. Anyways, Steve said it. I'll say it again. Talking about this topic, never stop learning. And enjoy the randomness. I hope you enjoyed. Everyone, Happy New Year for 2025. Season 13 has begun.
Happy New Year.
We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.